This is the Fighters Net podcast in association with the BFG Podcast. Today we are speaking with, once again, the CEO of the A-Leagues, Danny Townsend. Welcome back to the program, Danny.
Thanks, Blake. Good to be back.
So Holly is going to open for us today.
Hey, so the A-League men's season is now over. How did it go?
Yeah, look, I think on balance, it was exactly sort of what we were looking for. You know, we came out of COVID, both with the men's and women's competitions, suppressed, let's call it. And I think this season was really about rebuilding back to what we had pre-COVID, and all of our metrics reflected that, which is really pleasing. And obviously to finish off with a record attendance for the women's grand final and a really enthralling men's grand final last week, and a bit of a fairy tale end for the Central Coast Mariners was a fitting way to end the season.
So there was this much promised festival of football, and a lot of fans quite disappointed. In fact, some people were calling it the Fire Festival of football. How do you think that lived up to its promise, and maybe what will change in the future?
Look, I think you're never going to please everybody with these things, and obviously the way we executed on the announcement of our final series and the grand final was always going to put us behind where we wanted to be in terms of landing the concept. But fundamentally, we the Festival of Football was not a brand that we created. It was something that sort of evolved on its own. But we did want a week where we could pause and celebrate football. I think the events we put on last week, for those that did attend, and I'm sure a lot of the rhetoric is probably from fans that weren't there, but those that were there saw that we had a Dolan Warren Awards on the Thursday night, which was the first time we had fans there. We also had a parliamentary event on the Wednesday, which again was the first time we've been able to get 40 plus politicians in a room to talk about football, which, as we know, we're heavily underfunded as a sport. So that was really important for us. Friday night, we had a grand final party, which was a great event, which we'll build on. And then obviously we had a fantastic grand final. But, we did, it's been well documented that we'd looked to put an all-star game on. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for a range of different reasons. But the plan has always been to build on this concept. It was never going to be in year one, and the full enchilada. We had plans to build that out over time, and we continue to do that. The main thing is that our partners were very happy with the way it went, both our corporate sponsors, our broadcaster, and the government. And I think we put on a good show for football. So something to build on, but certainly not the finished product.
So what would be the plans moving on? Is that mostly a matter of an all-stars game, or?
Yeah, look, I think our intention is always to bring the best of football to Australia during football week, and an all-stars is absolutely part of that. This season just gone was challenging for many different reasons in attracting international clubs, largely because of the World Cup being inserted into the middle of the European season, which meant that it sort of elongated the European season, which ruled out a bunch of countries from being able to participate. Serie A, for example, finished on the same weekend as the A-League grand final, so that ruled out Italian clubs. Champions League final is this weekend, so any club that was in the running for the Champions League was ruled out. So that's an anomaly that isn't going to be the case moving forward, which will enable us to really secure opposition for All Stars well in advance, and really plan out that week more effectively. But it is what it is. We'll always have a crack. That's something that APL is always always striving to do things differently and find better ways to shine a light on football, and we'll continue to do that.
So obviously the grand final was on the pitch an enormous success. Off the pitch, in terms of turnout, was very, very good. That was the Coasties showing up, I think, more than anything. How do you think it would have gone if there was no New South Wales?
Yeah, okay, it's Holly. It's a very obvious point, right? It's always going to be challenging to sell to interstate teams into a fixed grand final. We knew that going into it. The government were well aware of that. The reality is that if you're going to try and make change and build on something, you're going to have a degree of risk, and the risk for us was that we would have two interstate teams, and having potentially Adelaide play Melbourne in the grand final, which was a real possibility going into that final weekend of semi-finals, certainly would have probably, or not probably, certainly had a different outcome last Saturday night. So, yeah, the Coasties turned out, I think the fact that arguably no Sydney team made the grand final, albeit Central Coast Mariners fans could travel a reasonable distance to get there, demonstrated that fans will come if your team makes the grand final. And, we were grateful for the event. It was a fantastic spectacle for football. But, yeah, I'm not naive to think that it wouldn't have been the same if we had a Melbourne-Adelaide grand final.
So also, since we spoke, the A-League women's season has concluded. How did you find that went?
Yeah, I thought it was great. All of our metrics are up considerably in the women's game, as you'd hope going into a home FIFA Women's World Cup that both our countries have on our doorstep in 40-odd days from now. So we see a real positive momentum behind the women's game. The APL are investing heavily behind it with expansion and extension of the season, which is really important. So, yeah, we were really, really happy with it. Obviously, the grand final was a great result for the game, having almost 10,000 people there, which was significantly up on the previous record of 6 for a grand final. Just demonstrates that there is genuine momentum behind the women's game. And I think coming out of what will be an enormous World Cup, I think it's going to go from strength to strength. So that, the really strong foundations are there, and our audiences are up, our attendances are up. All the major metrics that you look at for the health of a league are really promising.
What changes are sort of under discussion or already decided for the A-League women's season coming up?
Yeah, we're working with the FA on the domestic match calendar. So for those that don't know, we can't really set our draw for both men's and women's competitions until we align with the broader football pyramid for registration periods and the like, and also recognising international windows and all those sort of things. So it's reasonably challenging. But our goal at least with the women's competition is to start as early as we can. We don't want to have a long lag between what will be the euphoria of hosting a Women's World Cup into a dead period and then try and restart. I think for us, it's going to be as early as we can get going, we'll get going. And we naturally have to anyway, given the season is getting longer, which is great for female players, for female football fans, that there'll be more rounds of A-League women next season and capitalising on the adjacency to that World Cup.
What about things like the match kickoff times? That was a bit of a bugbear. And I do kind of feel like the Dub Zone program may have forced artificially a lot of early kickoff times. So how is that? Is that going to continue with those time periods? What about player welfare?
Yeah, look, it's a really important one, Holly, and one that we've spent a lot of time talking to the PFA and players about what they would prefer, because what we try and do is give the women's competition as much free air time as we can, because you've got 6 men's fixtures, you're going to have 6 women's fixtures. That's 12 time slots over the course of a weekend to try and run matches in clear air. It's just impossible. You're now going to get into a point where we're going to have a significant amount of crossover, which, when you think about the complexities of putting a draw together, it's about time slots, it's about availability of venues, it's about not making sure your men's and the women's team are playing at the same time in different cities. Like, there are so many complexities that go into pulling together a draw for both competitions that, inevitably you're always going to run into a situation where fans go, why would you do that? It makes no sense. But if you knew the reasons why, you would go, okay, I sort of makes sense. But one thing's for sure is that the broadcast element of, say, something like Dub Zone won't drive the draw. Dub Zone, in whatever form it takes next season, will conform to the right footballing structure. And we had those concurrent kickoffs for a reason last year, and I think we realised as well during at least the summer months that it's not sustainable. We can't have teams kicking off at 3 p.m. in the height of summer, whether it be men's, women's, or any competition. So, I think you live and learn with some of these things, and we'll find the right balance to ensure that we put player welfare at the centre of everything we do. We always do that, and I think. The broadcasting commitments are somewhat flexible.
So we'll move on to Blake.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions in terms of the Australian region. So, and sorry if these were the wrong ones, I didn't have the right document. So people are questioning whether Paramount is still a sustainable option for the Australian fans. Do you believe that's still a sustainable option for viewing purposes for our fans in Australia?
Absolutely. You know, Paramount have backed our sport. You know, they're the partner that stood up when we needed a broadcast platform to merchandise our game. And you know, they've obviously had their challenges with their streaming platform from a live sport experience. They continue to work behind the scenes to improve that. And I believe by the start of the new season that there'll be some improvements there that I think our fans will enjoy. But fundamentally, you know, when you take a step back and parking some of the user experience challenges, you know, they're the one mainstream broadcast media outlet that has supported our game. You know, supported the Matildas and the Socceroos as well, when others have backed away. And I think we shouldn't forget that, and we should respect them for that and appreciate them for that. And I certainly do. And I think that, you know, as time moves on, we're only 2 years into a 5+3 arrangement with them. So, you know, they remain committed to us and we remain committed to them.
And I mean, it's great that you have the backing with the Matildas and that kind of thing. But we've had some, complaints from, because our group is Australian and New Zealand, that some of the matches are unwatchable. So, you know, that's why we keep asking, is it viable?
I'm sorry, Blake, I'm unsure what you mean by unwatchable. What does that mean?
Yes, you know, they can't even watch it, or perhaps log on, or
look, that's not something I've experienced. I've never had an issue logging on or being able to see it. You know, we certainly in the first year there were some challenges, but I think this year the quality of the broadcast production, the accessibility of the product is absolutely fine. And I don't recall too many examples this year where fans were unable to watch any matches, if at all. So I think those, you know, whatever challenges you're referring to are probably long behind us.
right. So, people, another viewing thing, people are saying that, because we have international people as well, that for people who don't have broadcast deals, some have been able to not find the women's games on YouTube. So how can that be improved as well?
Again, it sort of baffles me a bit because every single game is available in markets whereby there isn't a licensed broadcaster. They're available on YouTube. So if there are black markets that we're unaware of, I'd absolutely welcome someone to reach out and tell us that they're in market X and they can't access the matches, because the intention has always been that where we have a licensed broadcaster, they'll take the matches. Where we don't have a licensed broadcaster, we make them free and accessible through YouTube. So if there's anyone listening out there who can't access it in whatever country they're in, then by all means reach out to APL and we'll ensure that we get them available, because, you know, our intention is to make men's and women's football in Australia and New Zealand accessible to every part of the world. So I'd certainly welcome that feedback if we can get it.
That's the only two I had because I didn't have that right paper.
Cool. Hey, Danny, going back to the A-League back office, what are the strategic goals for the league in the next year? What are your top three things that you're wanting to achieve?
Yeah, I think top three is probably hard to isolate, but I think in general it's continuing the growth trajectory we're on. You know, I think we went through a couple of years there, like all sports, where we're all hanging on for grim death to get ourselves through COVID and get out the other side of that. This year was really about stabilising and rebuilding our relationship with core fans and building them back into into the stadiums across the country, and our attendance was up 44% on last year. Our TV audiences was up 21%. So engagement signs are really positive. Our digital, social, and digital media numbers were significantly higher than any other season in the history of the A-League. So, we've really got some positive momentum. We want to keep building on that. We're, again, talking to Paramount and 10 and Sky New Zealand around how we can continue to build audience, looking at time slots that are going to drive more engagement. But I always go back to the barometer for me around the healthier sport is bums on seats and getting people into the live experience, building that atmosphere that is very unique to our sport. And ensuring that, week in, week out, the players are playing in front of, near full or full stadiums. And I think towards the back end of the year with Adelaide getting a number of sellouts going into their finals push, Central Coast Mariners selling out, record crowd of any code at Central Coast Stadium. We had an elimination final between Sydney and Western Sydney that was a record for the A-League. So some really positive signs around re-engagement in the game. And, we've got a long way to go. Like we're not sitting there thinking cues in the rack. We had a good end of the year. To Holly's point, we were thankful that the Mariners got there in the end to deliver a spectacle, but we're not naive to think that our code's got a way to go before we get to a point where, we can probably take a step back and enjoy the ride. There's a lot of hard work that we need to do to get this game where we need it to go.
So, speaking of that Mariners win, did you have any inclination it was going to be a 6-1 thrashing? Because I certainly didn't.
Not at all. And I sort of, as you can expect, the grand final week, I did many interviews with media around the game, and obviously they would ask what my prediction was. And my view was that if Melbourne City turned up and played the way they could play, they've probably got enough firepower and class to win. But I did have a caveat in that if they don't, Central Coast can really damage you. And I think that played out. I think, Rado Vidicic was sort of clear in his post-match where he said, they wanted it more than his team. And I think that was clear. And I don't think on reflection, I've rewatched the game, it was a 6-1 game. I think for long parts of the match, City dominated possession and probably played the better football. But, football is what's great about the game. It's won by little moments. And I think when it push came to shove, the intensity of the Mariners was just, they wanted it more, and they got the result, which was great for football. But look, I felt for City because they've been the benchmark team for a bunch of years now. They've won the Premier's Plate. They've played in 4 straight grand finals and only won one of them now, which if I reflect on the women's competition and Sydney FC going into their, I think, 5th straight grand final, having only won one. They were the dominant team in the regular season, and then really went the hard way to get to the final. And when they got there, I just had a feeling they were going to win that quite easily, and they did. I sort of felt that City might do the same, but credit to the Mariners, they got it done.
One of the we had a chat with David Dome from the Knicks a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that came up was, for David, he and as much as yourself, you're fans of the game. At the end of the day, we all want football to win, whatever that looks like. And so yourself as the CEO of the A-Leagues, plus David and the other managers, we all love the game. We all enjoy watching it. And I think sometimes people on the outside, the fans and supporters looking in, lose track of that as well. So just yeah.
Look, it's we're a strange bunch, us football fans, right? We maybe sometimes our passion moves us into a place where we lose sight of the reality of where we are. And I think, like you said, Jonathan, like we just love the sport. We want to see it succeed, and I think fans who are close to the sport are passionate about it to a point where we're impatient. And rightfully so. Our game should be in a much better place than it is right now for many, many different reasons. But we can't look back. There's no point looking in the rear vision mirror as a code. We've got to look forward and look at the positives that we've got. And I think we don't enjoy the support of the mainstream media in both our two countries. And that's largely because they're assigned themselves to other codes, and therefore they're vested in those codes succeeding over ours. And And that's a battle every day, of getting stories in newspapers, segments on news, free-to-air news media. It's a challenge because we aren't aligned to some of the mainstream media that the rugby league and rugby and AFL are. So it's always an uphill battle. But I think what we've tried to do is build a community of fans around our sport through Keep Up and other things that we're doing that will ultimately allow us to talk to the people that matter. And those that don't matter in mainstream media, who will never be supporters of our game, I don't care about. We've got across our two countries 10 million people that will fill in a survey and say they love football. That's plenty. That is plenty of people for us to really build an economy around our sport that makes it sustainable and makes it the biggest sport in our two countries. There is a sense of inevitability about that. But our job is to speed that up. How quickly can we get to that point where we are the number one sport in our two countries? And that's what keeps us going at the centre. It's why we fought hard to extricate the professional game from the regulator. And I think we're on a path. So we just, I get everyone's impatient. I'm the world's most impatient person myself. So, I want to get there quickly, but it doesn't come without compromise and sacrifice. And that's sort of sometimes hard for people to get their heads around, which I accept.
So just speaking of fans and engagement, there was a bit of a blip, crisis before Christmas with a couple of things with the fans. But it seems like the A-Leagues managed and yourself have done a lot of work to get, trying to get fans back on side and the representative groups set up and so on. How's that tracking? Is that going well in your view? Yeah,
look, I think again, looking back, which I don't like doing, but you should do to a point to learn. We certainly made some mistakes over the past 12 months in the endeavour to move the game forward. But, I think we did spend a bunch of time, me personally, with a lot of fan groups during, the aftermath of that Melbourne Derby situation and the grand final announcement, which I think was really positive in that, it gave me an opportunity to really be direct and clear on some of the backstory that you often don't read in a newspaper. But also look forward and go, well, if we're in this situation in the future, what can we build? Well, how do we inoculate ourselves from those type of things happening again? And I think the fan representative group that we built, or the structure of it at least is really good. And I think when we got to final series and there was a sort of a miscommunication between ourselves and the active groups around what we were doing, my feedback to them was, we could have, for vanity reasons, put out we've got a fan council together that's going to do A, B, and C, which wasn't meaningful. The work that our team have done in researching best practice from the Premier League and other major sports around the world to determine what does a good fan representative council look like that can have a meaningful impact on decision making for sport. Not just a vanity exercise that makes it look like fans have an input. So that work was really good work. We presented that to a bunch of the fan groups over that final series. What's really important in that process is that the clubs align to that structure, because as a league, to build a fan representative council that is genuinely representative of all fans, it needs to be built from the bottom up, meaning fans are fans of a football club first. They're not fans of the A-League. They're fans of their football club. Their football club plays in the A-League. So having that relationship with your club as a fan and having a voice at your club is the first step. And having that properly structured and consistent across the league was what we needed to do. So we need to get buy-in from all 12 clubs and then write it into our club charter. So it's not lip service from the clubs to us and to you as fans. So, we were really excited about the workshops we ran with clubs that they bought into the importance of having a meaningful relationship with your fans around decision-making at the club, and then laddering that up into a fan representative group for the league that tapped into those 12 club councils. So I think we've built a really good structure. Now it's about clubs executing and then us executing on the top of the club. So I think we're in a really sometimes crises spawn really positive things, and I think if we look back at what we've been through, if there is a positive outcome from that, it's certainly going to be the fan representative groups.
You got two of the two of the appointed Knicks fan group representatives on this call, and Blake and Holly. So we're off to a good start.
No, very good, very good. Look, I think every club's going to run their fan representative groups differently, and that's fine. We don't. It's not a cookie cutter exercise. How clubs want to build that representative group in their own space is up to them. We've got some sort of guardrails we've provided clubs, but I think every club will do their own thing, which is what they should do, and I'm sure we'll get some great feedback from those fan groups and great representatives on the national one. I don't know who's got the job to represent the Knicks yet on the league council, but time will tell.
Who's gonna go? Because
I can go next.
Anymore.
Okay. So the big announcement was potentially having. So there's two questions surrounding that. Do you have someone sort of lined up already to have this franchise? And is there any concern that having a second club in New Zealand will cannibalise the market?
Yeah, I missed the first part of it, Holly, but I suggest you're asking about Auckland. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So Auckland, do you have somebody lined up, and is there concern about cannibalising the market?
So let's tackle the first one first. We've spent a lot of time in Auckland in the past 3 months. I've been over there, I think, 3 or 4 times to meet with stakeholders like Sport New Zealand and obviously the Federation, stadium operators, or the grassroots community clubs we've had sessions with to ensure that whatever we build in Auckland is genuinely representative of the Auckland market for football. That's the first step. And I think what we're really pleased about was the response we got from those meetings. There's clearly an appetite for A-League football in Auckland. Obviously when Wellington go and play there, there's great support for the A-League and the Phoenix when they play there. So there's a market there that's underserved for A-League football, and our research told us that, but our on-the-ground work with stakeholders confirmed that. And equally alongside that, as it became public that we were looking to Auckland as an expansion market, there was a lot of people that came out of the woodwork who were interested in being involved from an ownership perspective. So we've got a really vibrant process going at the moment where we've got multiple consortiums of owners that want to be involved in that team, which is great. And that's both domestic and international investors. So I think that also highlights the attractiveness of Auckland as an expansion market. But I think my own learned and lived experience from being at Sydney FC when the Wanderers came in, there's this always a view that I've got a geography that I represent, that if you insert someone else into that geography, you're going to cannibalise your base. And I think the best thing that ever happened to Sydney FC was the Wanderers coming into the A-League. Probably the best moments in A-League history have been spectacles at derbies where you've just got the city divided, you've got passion, you've got genuine rivalry, and I think that's what's going to happen in Auckland. I anticipate with Auckland and Wellington in the A-League, it means we're all in New Zealand. I think I said it from the beginning, the A in A-League needs to define itself. And it was like an Australian league with a Wellington team. And my pitch to the board was we either embrace New Zealand as a genuine partner in this league or we don't. And the A stands for Australia and we just be unashamedly Australian. And I think that would have been a massive mistake. I think in having New Zealand vested in our league together, the A needs to stand for Australasia. It needs to represent what's great about football in our two countries. And you can't do that with one team. I think when when arguably the most populous city in the country doesn't have representation in our competition, are we really serious about it? And I spoke to Andrew Pragnell at Football New Zealand and said, would you support it? And he was like, please, if you're all in on New Zealand, we're all in on the A-League. And that was important to us. And I think it's going to be great for Wellington Phoenix. And it'll be great for football. I think as an aspiring young Kiwi footballer, to have one team in your country is not enough. And having two now, I think, provides more opportunity for young male and female players to play professional football.
Awesome. Final question for me. We have 2 very long off seasons at the moment. So for the women and the men, how can supporters or fans support their clubs and the leagues during this time?
Yeah, it's certainly something we're mindful of. We're looking. On face value, it seems odd, right, that we have such a long off season, but it's very much to do with the international registration calendar. You're only allowed 2 registration windows in any given year for the entire sport. So that's not just the A-League, it's how we orientate with the semi-professional level below and when they can register players. So this, I referred to it earlier, the domestic match calendar is a really complicated process. So we do have reasonable guardrails. I think naturally with the expansion and extension of the A-League women, we'll elongate that season, which is great. It'll mean that there's more A-League women's football than ever before, and the season will run for longer, which by virtue of that will shorten the A-League women off season. But yeah, we're looking into how do we I suppose insert more A-League football into the preseason that are meaningful, like a preseason competition. You've got the Australia Cup, which starts in whatever it is, 4 weeks' time for the Australian teams. But fundamentally, you've got a period where players come back in July after their breaks. You've got a July, August, September 3-month preseason. If you speak to any player, they're like, it's European players particularly go, it's longest pre-season in world football. So how do we put meaningful matches into that period that allow our fans to engage, but also allow our clubs to actually function? And that's a balance we need to manage. But we've certainly got our eyes on some opportunities there to bring more football to our fans to shorten that down period.
All right. Anything else from you, Jonathan?
Yeah. I see that Lionel Messi has transferred to Inter Miami, and I'm just wondering if maybe you could put some feelers out to them for the All-Star game for next year or the year after. I mean, that would be getting Messi to play in Australia on Australian soil would be quite a coup.
Yeah, well, look, we thought we had him there for a moment where we were with PSG. We're very close to coming to play the All-Star game this year. So that one slipped through our fingers. But look, into Miami, if it's true, they're building a pretty interesting story there with, I think, Di Maria's rumoured to be signing there as well. And obviously with Beckham at the helm, it's a bit of a story. So look, I think, I'm heading to New York to meet the MLS early July to talk about ways in which we can collaborate with them. They're very similar into their structure and their journey that they're on, that we're following. So I take a lot of learnings from the MLS and their rise that I believe we can follow a similar path. So, yeah, I'll be over there in July and hopefully be able to establish some clearer ties with them and take some learnings back to the A-League.
Have you got time for a couple more from me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you going to, excuse me, because I watch Australian politics as well, are you going to sit down with the new Labor government and look at the deal during this term for the grand final? Obviously, it's a few years away yet. But
yeah, like anything, Blake, it's you reflect and review everything you do. We're in that process at the moment of reviewing the entire season on every level, and certainly we'll be sitting down with the government and Destination New South Wales and reviewing what worked and what didn't work in Football Week and trying to improve it, and also getting a sense for to new government, to your point, what their appetite is for the long term. So that those reviews will take place, and we're certainly, we had the Premier of New South Wales come to 3 football events in the first 8 weeks of his time in office. We didn't have a Premier attend anything in the previous 4 years. So I think there's a clear appetite. Football Minister Premier Minns is actually in the politicians game we had during the Female Football Week there. Demonstrated he's not bad with his feet either. So hopefully longer term it's good for our game.
So you're confident that the deal will be better. The current deal will be even better under the Minns government.
Yeah, look, I think so. Like I said, they've been in office 9 weeks now, so they're all trying to find their feet. And the Labor government haven't been in power for 12 years prior to that, so I think they're certainly on a steep learning curve. But indications are, they're supportive of major events. They made a big announcement around UFC very early on in their tenure, and Minister Camper, who is the sports minister in New South Wales, was an ex-president of Sydney Olympic Football Club, so he's a football guy. Which goes well. But, look, this is not just about New South Wales. We want to engage the governments across Australia and New Zealand to support football. We want the federal governments to get behind our game. We've got, arguably the biggest, well, not arguably, it is the biggest female tournament in the world coming to our two countries in 40 days from now. And it will demonstrate how powerful football is, both, from a community and civic engagement perspective, but on a global diplomacy proposition. We are the world game, and that's something that only our code can deliver in our two countries. And I don't think we get enough credit or enough leverage from that position, and that's something we need to work hard on using.
And finally, before you go,
we talked about sorry, I was just going to ask, we talked last time about the difficulties of leveraging the big tournaments and the buzz around the big tournaments to generate interest in the domestic games. Are there any plans for the Women's World Cup that we can generate that interest and have that follow through to the domestic leagues?
Yeah, look, we're working hard with our clubs to put things in place over the course of the World Cup, and then coming off the back of that to connect with those people. Like, there's going to be 1 million odd people attend those games, and many of them will be attending for the first time, where they've probably never been to an A-League match, whether it be men or women. So how we capture that enthusiasm or renewed sort of interest in our game and have that translate into attendance into our domestic competitions is challenging, because FIFA run the event. So getting access to the data and being able to connect to those people is not as straightforward as you would hope. We're working with the FA and Football New Zealand to find ways around that, but there's, as you can probably guess, privacy and all these different other legal matters that make what you would think is a simple process be quite complex. So we're working through that. We're also looking at regulations around the A-League women on how we can attract as many stars who will light up stadiums around Australia and New Zealand into the A-League, after their experience, whether that's returning Matildas who've spent time abroad, who've spent that time in order to play in this World Cup. Maybe they see a path back into the A-League women, much like the men do, with players like McLaren and Lecky who've been away a long time, had great careers, and then come back to Australia to enjoy their football towards the back end of their careers. We think that we've got a plan to attract Matildas, but equally, Ferns and equally, other nationalities who come to Australia experience, a life experience playing in a World Cup, and realise that this is a pretty good place to ply their trade. And the A-League women in Australia and New Zealand, particularly with Auckland coming in as well, is going to represent a pretty attractive proposition for professional footballers.
Finally, just to finish off, we talked to David Dunn last week, as you're aware, and he talked about lifting some restrictions so that the Phoenix women can sign imports and visa players and so forth, as opposed to the rule that they had before. Have you been a part of those conversations, and is there any update in the last little while?
Yeah, there's no specific update to what Domi passed on in your chat with him, but I'm sure he mentioned that it's not something that the A-League can actually enforce. It's an FA related matter for their good of the game. They have a veto right on regulations around what's considered foreign player restrictions. I'm certainly an advocate, like Domi is, for freeing up New Zealand players, particularly as we look to expand into Auckland. Treating Australian and New Zealand players as one and the same, I think, is important, particularly as we look at that whole Australasian League proposition. You can't sort of say you're one thing and then on another part of your business, treat them differently. So we're certainly working with both federations to try and ensure that there's greater flexibility for the Kiwi teams.
Okay, thank you. Are we happy?
Very happy. Although just one comment, Danny. I think, we're talking about getting success off the back of the World Cup. I think it might be easier for Aussie to attract players to Manly than it might be getting them to move to Wellington. You guys have kind of got a bit of an advantage there.
As I sit here in Manly, literally, it's probably right. But by the way, I went to Domi, took me on a tour of the Wellington Phoenix training base there in Wellington, and I don't think I've seen anything like that in the A-League. So if players want to play in a genuinely high performance environment, I think Wellington Phoenix have got a jump on everyone with that setup. So it depends on what you're looking for, Jonathan.
Best in the world, you reckon?
Oh, look, I've seen some really good ones in the US, particularly around the NFL and the NBA. But in terms of football, it's certainly up there. I think, and it's not finished yet, so it was still a bit of a work in progress when I went through it. But it's genuinely world class, and I think it's a credit to everyone who was involved in putting that together. I think it's a bit of the best kept secret. Really, it needs to get more credit and some more visibility because it's something special.
Okay, we'll wrap it up there. So thank you, Danny, for coming back on the program. It's always a pleasure to have you on to talk about the business side of a wonderful football competition. And I would like to say, like and subscribe this video on YouTube and follow us on all your favourite audio platforms. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Blake. Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Jonathan.